Look, I'm giving you a 20 and that's it. Your parents are coming for a visit, not a dinner party. The phrase sounded casual, but it dropped into the middle of our kitchen, like a pebble tossed into a still pond. The ripple wasn't huge, but it spread in silent, stinging circles. That morning, Lily was finishing washing a bunch of collard greens when she heard her husband's voice from the living room. His name was Mark, the man she had chosen to marry 4 years ago. After a modest wedding, but one warm enough to make her believe she had found her rock, Lily didn't turn around immediately. Her hands kept stripping each stem, tossing out the wilted leaves, but her ears didn't miss a single word. Did you hear me, honey? $20. Don't buy anything crazy. Your mom and dad are used to eating simple. Mark's voice was flat, without yelling, without raising his tone, but it was exactly that calmness that made it hurt more than an outburst of anger. Lily dried her hands on her apron and walked out. She looked at Mark. Her eyes held no hatred, just a slight hesitation. Are you serious, Mark? He, holding his smartphone, looked up and frowned. Do you think I'm joking? The electric and water bills went up this month, and the money I send to my mom back home was more too. We have to save. Lily nodded slowly. She didn't talk back right away. Since getting married, she had learned one thing. Sometimes talking too much didn't change anything. It only made the atmosphere more tense. However, deep down, something was hardening. Mark sighed and put his phone down. Lily, you have to be realistic. We aren't a wealthy family. Besides, your folks are from a small farming town. They're used to humble meals. Why do you have to complicate things so much? The phrase complicate things so much left her a bit stunned. Not because she wanted to serve a lavish banquet, but because she simply wanted her parents to feel valued. She didn't say that, though. She just asked in a quiet voice, So, with $20, what exactly am I supposed to buy? Mark shrugged. I don't know. Figure out some vegetables, maybe some cheap cold cuts or sausage, some eggs. That's plenty. We serve them what we eat every day. What's the difference? Lily stood in silence for a few seconds, then reached out for the $20 bill Mark had left on the coffee table. That piece of green paper looked light, but it weighed incredibly heavy in her hand. All right, I understand, she said, turning around to head back to the kitchen without arguing, without sighing, without showing her disappointment. Only her footsteps seemed a little slower. Out in the living room, Mark went back to scrolling on his phone as if the conversation had meant nothing. Lily had been born in a small town in rural Iowa, near the banks of the Mississippi River, where daily meals sometimes consisted of nothing but a simple bean stew and a slice of cornbread, but they were always accompanied by laughter. Her father, John, was a quiet man who had worked in agriculture his whole life. Her mother, Mary, was a hard-working woman who, besides tending to a large garden, raised a few chickens to help supplement their income. Her family wasn't rich, but they never lacked love. When Lily got married, her parents gave her only one piece of advice. In your husband's home, live well. Don't compare yourself to anyone, but don't let anyone look down on you either. Lily always remembered that advice, but lately, she often wondered if what she was doing was exercising patience, or if she had already crossed the line into submission. Just like that morning, walking to the neighborhood grocery store with her reusable tote bag. The walk from their Chicago apartment wasn't long, but today she walked slower than usual. Perhaps because in her head she was counting every single cent of those $20. She stopped in the produce aisle, checking the price tags on everything: collard greens, spinach, zucchini. Any of it could be turned into a delicious dish. But how could she make it enough for 4 people without making it look pitifully cheap? The local grocer she always bought from saw her and smiled. Buying light today, Lily? Lily returned the smile. Yeah, I've got company coming, but I was thinking of cooking something simple. The grocer peeked into her basket and whispered, Simple is fine, but it's gotta taste right. Take these collards. I'll discount them for you. Lily thanked him and picked out some tomatoes, too. She moved on to the dairy cooler and bought a carton of eggs. With the money she had left, she stopped by the meat counter. She stared at the rows of packaged meats. The familiar, smoky smell reminded her of the food from her hometown, where her mother would often fry up smoked sausage to eat with hot bread and boiled greens. She asked for the price of a standard smoked beef sausage ring. The butcher gave her a number that wasn't too expensive. Lily thought for a second and bought a large pack. The total for her groceries was exactly $20. She didn't buy anything else. She was clear on how Mark viewed life, and equally clear on how she needed to live hers moving forward. Her parents arrived around noon. John was wearing an old but neatly pressed flannel shirt. In his hand, a small duffel bag. Mary carried a couple of tins of homemade fudge wrapped in wax paper. As soon as she walked in, she smiled. How? You keep the place so tidy. Living in Chicago and keeping it this clean. Very nice. Lily rushed to greet them, her voice sounding more cheerful. Mom, Dad, are you tired from the trip? Oh, nonsense. We're used to the Greyhound bus. A few hours is nothing. Mark came out of the bedroom, offering a polite, albeit obligatory, smile. Ah, you're here. Come in. Come in. Rest a bit. His words sounded polite but not overly enthusiastic. To him, his in-laws' arrival wasn't a major event. John nodded, looked around the apartment for a moment, and sat down in a chair. Living up here must be pretty expensive, huh? He said. Mark offered a thin smile. Yes, sir. You really have to know how to manage your money. That phrase, intentional or not, caused Lily a sharp, tiny pang. She immediately changed the subject. Come on, you guys relax. I'm going to start cooking. Mary stood up. Let me help you. No need, Mom. Sit down. I've got it, Lily said, disappearing into the kitchen. The small kitchen was spotless. She set her tote bag down and took out the contents one by one. Collard greens, tomatoes, eggs, smoked sausage. At first glance, it looked like a very humble meal. But for Lily, that wasn't a problem. She started cooking. She cleaned the greens again, washing them thoroughly. She sliced the tomatoes thin, beat the eggs, and slowly pan-fried the sliced sausage in a skillet she'd had forever. The savory, smoky aroma began to waft through the air. That smell brought back memories of Midwestern evenings when her whole family would gather around the dinner table. She did everything with calm and care not to waste time, but because she was pouring something more than just the act of cooking into the meal. In the living room, Mary asked Mark, "How's work going, son?" "It's all right, Mary. Sometimes good, sometimes slow. You know how business is. You just have to keep pushing." John was quieter, just nodding every now and then. His eyes drifted occasionally toward the kitchen, where his daughter was busy. A little while later, he asked, "Does Lily get overwhelmed living up here?" That simple question caught Mark off guard. He replied, "Well, like anyone, John. Living in the city means dealing with a lot of moving parts." John didn't ask anything else. He looked at his worn hands and said slowly, "My daughter is used to working hard since she was a little girl, but she's also very sensitive to how other people feel." Mark nodded without saying anything. The room grew a bit quiet. In the kitchen, Lily arranged the dishes on a tray. A bowl of vibrant, sautéed collard greens, a steaming bowl of tomato and egg hash, a plate of golden brown pan-fried sausage slices. And in the center of the tray, she placed something that, at first glance, would make anyone confused. She stared at the food for a moment and sighed softly. "It's ready!" she called out. "Mom, Dad, Mark, let's eat!" Her voice was as soft as always, but nobody knew that this meal would not be like the ones before. Lily carried the tray out, her steps slow but firm. She set it in the center of the dining table, arranged each bowl and plate, and then sat down. At first glance, the food was as simple as Mark had requested that morning. Greens, eggs and tomatoes, smoked sausage. However, right in the center of the table sat a small saucer, and on it was a pale yellow envelope, neatly folded. The envelope wasn't thick, but its exact placement in the center of the table made it the undeniable center of attention. Mark, who had just sat down, noticed it immediately and furrowed his brow. "What's this?" Lily didn't answer directly. First, she served her parents. Then she said quietly, "Eat first, Mark. You'll see." Lily's evasive answer annoyed Mark a little. He didn't like beating around the bush. "What is this about? I told you to cook something simple. What's with the theatrics?" Lily still didn't look at him. She placed a portion of greens on her mother's plate. "Yes, Mark, this is simple." Her voice was smooth, not defiant, but not as submissive as usual either. John sat there, looking at the food and then at the envelope. He didn't ask, he just stayed quiet. Meanwhile, Mary looked a bit hesitant. "Lily, what is this, sweetie?" Lily turned to her mother and smiled faintly. "I'll explain after we eat, Mom." The way she spoke made Mary drop the subject. She picked up her silverware, but her eyes kept drifting back to the envelope. Mark couldn't hold back. He grabbed the envelope and flipped it over. Why would you put this in the middle of the table? Who eats staring at an envelope? Lily looked at him. This time her gaze was direct. Open it, Mark. Mark paused for a moment, then slowly tore the edge of the envelope. Inside, there was only a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. On the page, written in Lily's neat, clear handwriting, it read, $20. Grocery money for the day. Mom and Dad arrived. Mark finished reading and frowned even deeper. Then his eyes moved to the list below it. It was a breakdown of the expenses. Collard greens, $2. Tomatoes and onion, $3. Eggs 1 dozen, $2. Smoked sausage, $6. Bread, $2. Oil, salt, butter, etc. Estimated, $4. Total, $19. Every line was written meticulously, not missing a single cent. Mark stared at it for a second and let out a short laugh. A laugh devoid of any humor. Why are you doing this? I told you to cook with the money I gave you. Lily nodded. Yes, Mark, I did exactly what you told me. She paused and continued with the same calm voice. I just wanted you to see clearly what $20 can actually get you. The atmosphere at the table tightened. Mary looked at her daughter, and then at her son-in-law, not knowing what to say. John remained silent, but the expression in his eyes had changed, as if he were thinking deeply. Mark tossed the paper back onto the table. His voice rose slightly. I see it. So what? It's enough to eat, isn't it? Lily stared right at him. Yes, Mark, it's enough to eat. But is it enough to make my mother and father feel welcome? The question wasn't shouted, but it was enough to render Mark speechless. He couldn't answer. Lily didn't push him. She turned to her parents. Mom, Dad, try it. I fried the sausage just like we do back home. Mary took a bite, chewed slowly, and nodded. Yes, honey, it's cooked perfectly. I haven't had it like this in a while. John tried the greens. After swallowing, he said, Vegetables cooked like this are good enough. You don't need anything fancy. Hearing that, Mark seemed to catch a breath of fresh air. He smiled faintly. You see? Your mom and dad agree. Simple as plenty. Lily didn't argue. She simply continued eating, but her gaze was no longer evasive. The meal went on, but the mood wasn't as pleasant as it had been at the start. A few moments later, John put his fork down and looked at Mark. Mark? Son? Yes, sir. What is it? You work hard. I know living in the city is expensive. I understand that. Mark nodded. That's right, John. You have to calculate everything down to the dime. John nodded slowly and continued. But sometimes, being cheap isn't always good. That sentence left Mark a bit thrown. John didn't say much else, just added quietly. Whether you have a little money or a lot isn't as important as how we treat each other. The entire table fell silent. Lily sat there listening to every word her father said, her heart feeling both warm and incredibly tight. Mark didn't argue, but his expression shifted. He wasn't used to being called out so directly, especially by his father-in-law. He tried to keep his voice level. Yes, sir, I understand. But I believe we have to be realistic. We can't be wasteful just out of pride. Lily smiled faintly, a bitter smile, but still soft. Do you think I wanted to show off out of pride? Mark looked at her. That's not what I meant. But putting this envelope on the table, tracking every single penny, you're trying to prove a point. Lily shook her head. No, Mark, I don't want to prove anything. She paused, her voice dropping. I just want you to understand how I feel. Mark fell silent. Lily looked down at her plate. My parents didn't come all the way here just to eat fancy food. They came because I want them to see that their daughter is living well and is valued. She lifted her face and looked directly into Mark's eyes. Not treated like someone who has to count every dime just to host her own parents. The words weren't spoken harshly, but they seemed to freeze the air in the room. Mary whispered softly, Lily, that's enough, sweetheart. But Lily shook her head. It's okay, Mom. I just want Mark to understand. Mark could no longer maintain his morning composure. He dropped his fork and sighed. So, what do you want? Do you want me to give you more money, or just cater to your every whim? Lily looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, just a deep exhaustion. I don't want you to give me more money. I just want you to stop looking at me like I'm a freeloader. The sentence landed lightly, but with crystal clarity. Mark froze. Lily continued in the same flat tone. Ever since I quit my job to take care of the house, you've hinted at it a lot. Maybe you didn't mean it maliciously, but I've heard it enough times to know how you view me. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lily didn't push him. She just kept talking as if she were telling a story. Just because I'm at home doesn't mean I do nothing. I manage the meals, the cleaning, the budgeting. None of that generates a paycheck, but without it, this house wouldn't function. She smiled faintly. But maybe you think none of that has any value. Mark lowered his head, unable to look at her anymore. The dining room became completely silent. A few moments later, John stood up. All right, that was a good meal. I'm going to step outside for a bit, he said, heading toward the small apartment balcony. Mary stood up to follow him. Inside, only Lily and Mark remained. They sat across from each other, but the distance between them felt massive. Mark was the first to speak. His voice had lost its rigid edge. I didn't expect it to end up like this. Lily looked at him gently. Because you've never tried to put yourself in my shoes. Mark remained silent. Lily stood up and started clearing the plates. Think about it, Mark. I don't need an answer right now. She carried the stack of dishes to the kitchen, leaving Mark alone at the table. Mark looked at the envelope still resting on the table, then at the leftover food. For the first time, he felt that this simple meal wasn't simple at all. And the envelope wasn't what made him the most uncomfortable. It was everything it was forcing him to think about. After that meal, a strange quiet took over Lily and Mark's apartment. It wasn't a heavy, suffocating silence, but one that made it feel like something was left hanging, something unfinished. Lily was at the sink washing dishes. The water ran steadily. Her hands moved mechanically, but her thoughts weren't as light as before. She wasn't angry, nor did she want to blow the issue out of proportion. But what she had just said felt like a door being opened, and once opened, she couldn't pretend it never happened. Out on the balcony, John was sitting on a plastic chair, holding a mug of coffee Lily had just brewed for him. He looked down at the busy Chicago street below, watching the people go by, each with their own story. Mary sat next to him and asked quietly, "Did you notice something off between them before this?" John didn't answer immediately. He took a sip of coffee and said slowly, "Lily's been holding that in for a long time." Mary sighed. I felt it too. Ever since she moved up here. Every time we called, she always said everything was fine. But I could hear it in her voice that she was hiding something. John nodded. She takes after you when you were young. You used to bottle everything up because you were scared of bothering people. Mary smiled faintly, though her eyes reflected sadness. But if you keep bottling it up, one day you have to explode. They sat together without speaking further. They didn't blame their son-in-law entirely, but they couldn't ignore what had just unfolded. Inside the house, Mark was still sitting at the dining table. In front of him was the envelope Lily had left. He had read it several times, but he still couldn't find peace. He was a practical man. Growing up, he had learned to be fiercely independent and calculating. His dad died when he was young, and his mom raised 2 boys on a shoestring budget. Because of that, money was always something to be treated with extreme caution. He didn't feel he was wrong for wanting to save, but Lily's words kept echoing in his head. I just want you to stop looking at me like I'm a freeloader. He sighed, picking up the envelope and studying his wife's handwriting, the same handwriting he had admired when she addressed their wedding invitations, back when she wrote out the shopping list for their first apartment. Back then, it looked beautiful to him. Now, it felt distant. He stood up and walked into the kitchen. Lily was still washing dishes. Hearing his footsteps, she knew it was Mark, but she didn't turn around. Mark stood behind her for a moment and then said, "Let me help you." Lily paused. It was a phrase he rarely uttered. She turned and shook her head. "It's okay, Mark. I'm almost done." Mark didn't move. He grabbed a clean dish towel and stood next to her. "Then I'll dry." Lily looked at him for a few seconds and didn't say anything else. She kept washing, and Mark kept drying. They stood side by side, very close, but neither spoke. A few moments later, Mark said, "I didn't realize you felt that way." Lily didn't stop scrubbing. "I don't blame you for thinking I'm a freeloader." "I never said that," Mark interrupted. Her voice remained steady. "You never said it directly, but the way you acted made me feel it." Mark fell silent. Lily placed the last plate in the drying rack and turned to face him. Put yourself in my place. Would you feel comfortable? Mark couldn't answer. Lily didn't press him. She just added, It's over now. Mom and Dad are still here. Let's not ruin the mood. She dried her hands and walked out of the kitchen. Mark was left alone, holding the dish towel. For the first time, he truly didn't know what to say next. That afternoon, Lily set out the fudge her mother had brought. The whole family sat in the living room. The mood was lighter than at noon. Mary took a piece of fudge and smiled. I made this just yesterday. Nobody back home really makes it from scratch like this anymore. Lily looked genuinely happy. I've missed this so much, Mom. You always made it for me when I was little. Mark took a piece, tasted it, and nodded. It's really good, Mary. That simple compliment made Mary's smile widen. If you like it, have some more, Mark. John looked at his son-in-law. What are your hours like at work, son? I work at an office downtown, John, but I put in a lot of overtime. Sometimes I get home pretty late. Yeah, well, whatever the job is, make sure you take care of your health. The conversation drifted to everyday topics. No one brought up the lunch, but its aftershocks were still subtly present. A while later, Mary stood up. Lily, I want to check out that neighborhood market nearby. They say city grocery stores are totally different from our general store. Lily nodded. Sure, Mom, I'll walk with you. Mark chimed in. Let me come with you guys. Lily looked at him, a bit surprised. He rarely volunteered for errands. You don't have to, Mark. It's just down the street. We can walk. But Mark shook his head. It's fine. I don't have anything else going on right now. Ultimately, the three of them went to the market together. John preferred to stay at the apartment and rest. The market wasn't overly packed in the afternoon, but it was lively. Vendors organizing produce, neighbors chatting in the aisles. Mary looked around, her eyes wide. Wow, look at all this variety. Lily smiled. Yeah, Mom, they have everything, but the prices are definitely higher. Mark walked beside them without saying much, just occasionally answering his mother-in-law's questions. After a while, Mary stopped in front of the butcher counter. That beef looks really fresh. It's hard to find cuts looking that nice back home nowadays. Lily glanced at the price tag per pound and hesitated. Mark noticed. He stepped up and spoke directly to the butcher. How much for the chuck roast? The butcher gave him the price. Mark didn't overthink it. Give me 3 pounds of that. Lily turned to look at him. Why are you buying a roast, Mark? For dinner tonight. Lily lowered her voice. But we still have food at home. Mark looked at her and said quietly, It doesn't matter. Let's have a nice dinner. That simple sentence caught Lily off guard. This morning he was counting every dime. And now, he didn't say anything else. After buying the groceries, they continued their walk. The mood was more relaxed. There were even a few laughs. That evening, Lily was back in the kitchen, but this time, the ingredients weren't restricted by a $20 budget. She prepared a rich pot roast with carrots and potatoes. The savory, hearty aroma filled the apartment. Mark stopped in the doorway, watching her. Do you need a hand? Lily turned and gave a small smile. As long as you stay out of my way, that's help enough. Mark smiled back. The tension between them hadn't completely vanished, but the ice was thawing. Dinner was warmer, not just because the food was richer, but because the atmosphere had shifted. There were no envelopes on the table. What stood out to Mark the most was Lily's diligence. Despite the hard things she had said that morning, she remained just as attentive, serving her parents, making sure everyone had what they needed. He looked at his wife and suddenly realized that maybe he had gotten so used to the flawless way she managed everything that he had completely forgotten its value. Dinner passed pleasantly, full of stories and laughter. But when everyone went to bed, Mark stayed awake. He remembered every word Lily had said, every look from his in-laws, and for the first time, he questioned his own worldview. He had been saving money, but without realizing it, he was bankrupting his relationship with the person closest to him. The question didn't have an immediate answer, but it kept churning in his mind, and Mark knew that if he didn't face it head-on, that envelope wouldn't be the last one to appear in their lives. That night, the sky outside was clear, but the air inside the bedroom felt heavier than usual. Not because of a fight, but because they were both lost in their own thoughts. Lily lay with her back to Mark. She wasn't angry, nor was she trying to make things worse, but there was an empty space in her chest that hadn't been filled yet. She wasn't a complainer, but once she spoke up, it meant she had been chewing on it for a long time. Mark lay behind her, eyes wide open in the dark. He wasn't used to this feeling. Normally, if there was a problem, his default was to shut down and let it blow over. This time, however, the silence made his skin crawl. He stared at his wife's back and whispered, "Lily." She didn't roll over, but she answered, "Yes? Are you still mad?" The simple question made Lily pause. She didn't answer right away. A few moments later, she said slowly, "I'm not mad." Mark let out a breath of relief. But before he could feel completely at ease, Lily added, "But I am sad." The words "I am sad," though spoken softly, hit Mark harder than any screaming match. He lay quietly for a few seconds before saying, "I didn't mean to make you sad." Lily turned over to face him. In the darkness, the ambient light from the street lamp was enough to illuminate his expression. "I know," she said sincerely. She understood that Mark wasn't a bad guy. He was just too entrenched in his own survival habits. So entrenched that he didn't realize when his armor bruised other people. But have you ever thought, Mark? Sometimes what we consider normal becomes a heavy burden for the people around us. Mark couldn't argue. Lily didn't wait for a response. She turned back around and pulled the blanket up. "Come on, let's get some sleep. We still have to take my parents sightseeing tomorrow." The conversation ended, but his thoughts didn't. The next morning, Lily woke up earlier than usual. She went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and started breakfast. Mark also woke up earlier than normal. He walked out and saw Lily standing by the stove. The morning light filtering in made the small kitchen feel inviting. He stood there for a moment, and then said, "Let me make the coffee." Lily was a bit surprised, but didn't protest. Mark grabbed the coffee grounds and prepped the drip machine. When it was done, he handed a mug to Lily. "Here." She took it and gave a small nod. "Thanks." They stood side by side, sipping their coffee in silence. But this time, the silence didn't carry the weight of the night before. Soon after, John and Mary woke up. The family had a simple breakfast of toast and eggs. Afterward, Mark said, "I'll drive us around the city today. We can hit the big spots." Mary smiled. "You don't have to do that, Mark. We can just take the train." "It's no trouble, Mary. I know the roads." Lily looked at Mark. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, something hard to name. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture, but it wasn't something she saw from him often either. The car cruised down the busy Chicago avenues. Mary and John sat in the back, admiring the skyscrapers. "Where do you guys want to go? Just say the word," Mark offered from the driver's seat. Mary chuckled. "Anywhere is fine. We really just came to see you two." Lily turned around. "Mom, let's stop by Millennium Park later, okay? It's nice down by the water." "Sure, honey. Wherever you lead, I'll follow." Mary's cheerful voice lightened the mood. The lakefront park was bustling that morning. Joggers, tourists taking photos at the Bean, kids running around. Lily and her mother sat on a park bench while Mark went to a nearby kiosk to buy drinks. Mary looked around and whispered, "So many people out here, Lily." "Yeah, Mom. The city is always like this." A moment later, Mary turned to her. "Lily." "Yes, Mom?" "About yesterday. What you did was fine." Lily looked surprised. "I'm not just taking your side, but I could see you've been putting up with a lot for a long time." Lily stayed quiet. Mary continued, "But you also have to try and understand your husband. He was raised differently, so his way of thinking is different." Lily nodded. "I know, Mom. I understand. Understanding is good, but being understanding doesn't mean you have to accept everything. You have to speak up, but in a way that makes the other person actually want to listen." Lily smiled faintly. "Yeah, Mom, I'm learning." Mother and daughter shared a knowing look and smiled. Mark returned holding 4 cold iced teas. "Here you go, Mary." "Oh, thank you, Mark." He sat down and looked at Lily. "You want to head anywhere else?" Lily shook her head. "Just sitting here is perfect." John came strolling back from looking at the lake. He sat down and sighed with a grin. "Boy, the wind off that lake will wake you up." The whole family laughed. The mood was bright, but Mark still felt an unresolved knot in his chest. Around noon, they headed back to the apartment. Lily went into the kitchen to prep lunch. Instead of heading to the couch to check his emails, Mark followed her. "Let me help." Lily turned around. "Do you even know how to cook?" Mark grinned. If I don't, I'll learn. Lily handed him a cutting board and a knife. All right then, chop up this bell pepper. Mark took the knife. With awkward, choppy motions, he started cutting. The pieces were all over the place. Some huge, some tiny. Lily watched him and laughed. If you chop them like that, they're going to cook super unevenly. Let them be a little weird, builds character, Mark joked. They both laughed. The kitchen suddenly felt more intimate, reminding them of the early days of their marriage. However, that knot in Mark's chest was pushing him to say something. He put the knife down and looked at Lily. Lily. Yeah? I want to ask you something. Lily stopped what she was doing and faced him. Go ahead. Mark hesitated, then asked, all this time, have you ever felt like I was looking down on you? The question was blunt, but Lily didn't dodge it. Yes. Sometimes, she answered honestly. Mark nodded, as if he expected that. And you didn't say anything because you thought it was pointless, right? Lily added, plus, I didn't want to make you feel bad. Hearing that made Mark's stomach drop. He looked at his wife. For the first time, he clearly saw that Lily wasn't always as resilient as he assumed. She just chose to endure it. He sighed. I'm sorry. Lily didn't look shocked, nor did she answer right away. I'm sorry I was so blind to how you were feeling. She let a few seconds pass before saying, just knowing that you see it now is enough. There was no lecture, no immediate absolution, just a fair acknowledgement. But it was exactly that response that made Mark realize he needed to do more. He looked at the half-prepped lunch and remembered the envelope from yesterday, the little piece of paper that had made him rethink everything. He knew this story wasn't over. Because what needed to change wasn't the $20 budget, but the way he looked at the woman standing in front of him. Lunch that day felt completely different. Not because the food was extravagant, but because every person at the table was making small, noticeable shifts. Lily was still the first to serve her parents, reminding everyone to eat before it got cold. But Mark, sitting across from her, wasn't glued to his phone. He had left it on the counter and was fully present. These small details made the room feel whole. John looked at his son-in-law. Your job seems pretty stressful, son. Mark paused, thought about it, and replied, sometimes it is, John. The corporate world up here demands you to always be on the gas pedal. John nodded. Yeah, it's the same everywhere in its own way. But if there's pressure, you've got to find a release valve. Don't carry it all on your own back. Mark smiled slightly. Yes, sir. I'm learning to do that. Lily looked at him and smiled too. She noticed Mark was engaging more. He wasn't just giving his usual one-word answers. Mary took a bite of the lunch. This hash tastes just like home, Lily. Mark turned to his wife. Did you learn this from your mom? Yeah. She taught me when I was little. Mark chuckled. And here I thought you just Googled all your recipes. The unexpected joke made the whole table laugh. Lily laughed too, feeling her chest feel lighter. It had been a long time since laughter like that echoed around their table. After eating, everyone took a break. John dozed off in the recliner. Mary turned on the TV. Lily, after finishing up the kitchen, was about to sit with her mom, but Mark called out to her. Lily, can you come here a second? She turned. Yeah? I want to talk. Lily was a bit surprised, but followed her husband out to the small balcony. A cool breeze carried the sounds of city traffic. Mark stood there, his hands resting on the railing, not looking directly at her. I think we need to clear the air. Lily didn't say anything. She just stood beside him. I know you've been holding back these past few days. Lily gave a small smile. I'm not one to blow things out of proportion, but that doesn't mean it doesn't sting. Her words made Mark turn to face her. I've been doing a lot of thinking, not just about yesterday, but about everything since we moved here. Lily stayed quiet. I always thought I was doing the responsible thing, saving, crunching numbers, planning for the future. But I forgot one major thing. He looked right into her eyes. I forgot to ask you how you felt about it. Lily met his gaze. Her eyes weren't evasive, but they weren't overly emotional either. Go on, Mark. Mark sighed. I'm sorry I let you shoulder that feeling all by yourself. Lily looked out at the street below. You know, I don't need a bunch of apologies. Mark looked confused. Then, what do you need? Lily turned to him, her voice remaining soft but firm. I need you to change the way you think, Mark. The way I think? Yes, she said slowly. You operate on the belief that because I don't bring in a paycheck, my contribution has no value. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but stopped himself. Lily continued. Think about it. If I didn't do what I do, who would? You come home from the office. Dinner is hot. The apartment is clean. The bills are sorted. None of that happens by magic. She wasn't speaking fast, and she wasn't attacking him. She was stating a basic fact. I don't need you to throw me a parade. I just need you to value my work. Mark nodded slowly. I get it. Lily studied his face. Do you? Really? I think, this time, I really do. They stood there without saying anything else, but the emotional gap between them felt noticeably smaller. That afternoon, a neighbor came by to visit. I heard your parents were in town, so I wanted to pop over and say hi. Lily looked pleased. Hey, Brenda. Come on in. Mary smiled. Well, hello there. After a few minutes of small talk, Brenda turned to Mark and smiled. You are a lucky guy, Mark. Mark blinked. Lucky? Why? Having a wife like Lily. She's hardworking, organized, and she looks out for everybody. Lily blushed. Oh, stop it, Brenda. Brenda shook her head. I'm not exaggerating. Everyone in the building knows it. Mark smiled outwardly, but his mind was racing. Brenda went on. Honestly, half the time I have to ask Lily for tips on how to stretch my grocery budget. Lily quickly interjected. I just do what I can. Mark looked at his wife, remembering all the times he had subtly implied she didn't know how the real world of money worked. He had never realized that his wife's competence was so highly respected by the people around them. That night, after Brenda left and her parents had gone to their guest room, Mark sat in the living room. Lily was wiping down the dining table. He called out to her. Lily? Yeah? I need a favor. She walked over. What kind of favor? Mark hesitated, then said, Can you teach me how to manage the household budget? Lily froze. What did you say? I'm serious. Mark offered a self-deprecating smile. I always thought I was the finance guy, but I'm realizing maybe I'm only good at hoarding money, not actually managing it. Lily looked at him, a mix of shock and genuine warmth spreading in her chest. You really want to learn? Yeah, but you have to promise to boss me around. I can do that, Lily smiled. We'll start tomorrow. They shared a look and a genuine smile. It wasn't a massive, cinematic moment, but it was enough to smooth over the rough edges of the past few days. However, Lily still had one thing in her heart she hadn't said, and she knew she'd have to bring it up eventually. For Mark, asking his wife for help didn't bruise his ego like he thought it would. Instead, it felt like a way to finally understand her, and maybe understand himself a little better too. The next morning, Lily didn't go straight to the stove. She set a small spiral notebook and a pen on the dining table. Mark walked out of the bedroom, saw the setup, and stopped. Wow, no breakfast today? Lily smiled lightly. I'll cook, but I want to show you something first. Mark looked at the notebook, pulled out a chair, and sat down. School is in session? You said you wanted to learn. Lily sat across from him and opened the notebook. On the first page, there were columns of neat handwriting. This is the household ledger. Mark looked surprised. How long have you been keeping this? A long time. Lily flipped the pages. Each page tracked a week. She detailed every deposit and every single expense. Take a look. Mark picked it up and read it slowly. He was a numbers guy, but the way she tracked everything amazed him. It wasn't just basic math. She noted unexpected expenses, highlighted days when costs spiked, and even tracked the exact margins where she managed to squeeze out savings. He stared at it for a long time before speaking. I had no idea you did this. Lily smiled faintly. You never asked. It wasn't an accusation, but it still made Mark feel a twinge of guilt. So, you basically manage all the cash flow for the apartment? No, I only manage what you transfer to the joint account, Lily said matter-of-factly. And sometimes, it's not enough. Mark looked up. Not enough? Why didn't you tell me? Lily met his eyes calmly. I tried. But you always cut me off and said we needed to save. Mark fell silent. I'm not against saving, Lily continued. But saving doesn't mean slashing basic necessities. She pointed to a line on the page. Like right here. The gas bill spiked this winter. I had to pull from the grocery budget to cover it. We ate a lot of rice and beans that week. Mark looked at the entry and nodded slowly. I didn't complain because I figured as long as I could handle it, it was fine. She closed the notebook and looked at him. But that day, for the first time, I felt like I couldn't handle it anymore. Mark knew she meant the $20 lunch. He sighed. I'm sorry. I don't need you to keep saying that. Then what do we do? I need us to do this together, Lily said. Together? Yes. Running this house isn't just my job. It's our job as a team. Mark nodded. Okay. From now on, we do it together. Let's start today. Lily opened the notebook and handed him the pen. You write it down. Mark took the pen, feeling strangely clumsy. Write what down? The grocery budget for today. How much? Lily looked at him. Based on what you see, what do you think is appropriate? Mark thought for a second. Maybe $40? Lily didn't say anything. She just nodded. All right, write it down. Mark logged the number. His handwriting wasn't as neat as hers, but it was clear. He looked up. So, we're going shopping? Lily smiled. Having $40 doesn't mean we blow it all just because we can. Mark laughed. What's the difference? The difference, Lily said softly, is having a limit forced on you versus having options. Mark nodded. I get it. After the lesson, they went to the grocery store together. This time, Mark pushed the cart. Lily walked beside him, offering tips. This chicken is a better price per pound. Grab that one. These apples are in season. Grab a few extra. Mark tossed items in without heavily scrutinizing every single penny, not because he didn't care, but because he was learning to trust her balance. The cashier, an older woman who knew Lily, smiled. Well, look at this. Rare to see you here, Mark. Mark smiled back. Yeah, I'm in training. That's smart. A husband who knows his way around the grocery store keeps his wife happy. Lily just smiled. When they got home, Lily cooked while Mark washed vegetables and peeled onions. John peeked into the kitchen from the hallway and whispered to his wife, Look at that. He's coming around. Mary nodded. We'll see. But they both smiled. Lunch that day had no envelopes and no tension, just easy conversation. But halfway through, John suddenly asked Mark, Son. Yes, sir. Do you think the work Lily does around here is hard? The blunt question made Mark pause. He looked at his wife and answered, Yes, John, I think it is. John nodded. Household work doesn't punch a clock, and it doesn't print a paycheck. But that doesn't mean it doesn't hold the whole place together. I understand that now, John. Lily didn't say anything, but her eyes softened. That afternoon, while everyone rested, Lily sat alone in the kitchen. She opened her notebook. Seeing Mark's messy handwriting from that morning made her feel like a real shift was happening. She didn't need him to be perfect. She just needed a partner willing to see, understand, and walk beside her. But there was still that one thing she hadn't voiced. She had thought about packing up and going back to Iowa not out of anger, but out of sheer burnout. She looked toward the window, watching the afternoon sun hit the brick buildings outside. Maybe I need to give it a little more time, she whispered to herself. Meanwhile, Mark was sitting on the balcony with John. They weren't talking much, but the vibe wasn't stiff. A few minutes passed before Mark spoke up. John? Yeah? I want to ask you something honestly. Did you ever do something that really hurt Mary's feelings? John chuckled. Of course I did. Who hasn't? What did you do about it? John looked out at the skyline. Fixed it. That's it. If you know you messed up, you fix it. But you have to actually put the work in to fix it. That simple sentence gave Mark a lot to chew on. He nodded. I hear you. John added, Marriage isn't a scorecard of who's right and who's wrong. It's about who is willing to step up and try to understand the other person first. Mark stayed quiet. He knew he was starting to get it, but real change takes time, and he knew there would be other tests coming. The afternoon passed peacefully, but by evening, a minor incident threatened to shake the foundation again. After dinner, while Lily was loading the dishwasher, Mark's cell phone rang. He looked at the screen, frowned slightly, and stepped out into the hallway to answer. Lily didn't pay much attention, but as she walked past the living room, she heard fragments of his voice. Yes, Mom, I know, but I can't right now. Yeah, I'll figure it out. His voice wasn't loud, but it was stressed enough to let Lily know something was wrong. She didn't stop to eavesdrop. She just went back to the kitchen. A few minutes later, Mark walked in, looking tense. "What's wrong, Mark?" He hesitated. "My mom called. She said the transfer I sent her this month was lighter than usual." Lily nodded. "Right, because we had extra expenses this month." Mark sighed. "But she doesn't get that. She thinks I'm holding out on her." Lily stayed quiet. She even pulled the, "A son changes when he gets a wife" card. Lily froze. She wasn't angry, but the feeling was all too familiar. It wasn't the first time she had been the unspoken scapegoat. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that wasn't true." "Did she believe you?" Mark offered a bitter smile. "Didn't sound like it." Lily went back to wiping the counter. Old thoughts crept back in. In the past, whenever there was friction between Mark and his mother, Lily was the one who was expected to yield. Nobody outright demanded it, but the expectation hung in the air. Later that night, after her parents went to sleep, Mark sat down with Lily. "Lily, I think we should send my mom a little extra this month to smooth things over." Lily wasn't shocked. "How much extra are we talking?" He named a number that was significantly higher than usual. Lily didn't flat out reject it, but she asked, "And how are we covering our own bills if we send that?" Mark fell silent. Lily opened her notebook to the current month. "Look, we just ran the numbers a few days ago. If we send that much extra, we have to slash something else." Mark looked at the columns but didn't speak. "Where do you want to pull it from?" she asked. Mark sighed. "I don't know." "I don't either." They sat in silence. Lily didn't want to make his life harder, but she refused to pretend the math magically worked. "Mark, I am not telling you not to take care of your mother. I know you're a good son. But we are a married couple. Decisions like this have to be made together, based on reality." "I know. And you need to explain it to her properly," Lily added firmly. "It can't just be, 'We don't have the money,' and let her assume I spent it all." Mark looked surprised. "You think she thinks that?" Lily gave a dry smile. "I don't have to guess to know that's exactly what she thinks." Mark didn't have a defense for that. Lily closed the notebook. "Let's table this for now. Let's not ruin the rest of the time my parents are here." "Okay." But inside Mark, the tug of war was becoming painfully clear. His duty to his mother on one side, his partnership with his wife on the other. For the first time, he realized he couldn't just blindly appease one without severely impacting the other. The next morning, while Lily was cooking breakfast, she heard her mother call out, "Lily, come here a sec, honey. I want to talk to you." "Just a minute, Mom." Lily turned the burner down, dried her hands, and walked to the living room. Mary was sitting on the sofa. She didn't look mad, but she didn't look relaxed either. "What's up, Mom? How do you guys handle the money around here? Do you and Mark actually talk about it?" Lily was a bit taken aback, but answered honestly, "Sometimes, Mom. Well, we used to rarely talk about it. Lately, we've been talking a lot more." Mary nodded. "Good." She lowered her voice. "I don't want to stick my nose where it doesn't belong, but if you don't lay down the law early on, it just turns into a mess later." Lily sat down next to her. "I know, Mom." "Don't bite your tongue just to keep the peace. Giving in once or twice is fine, but if you do it all the time, it becomes the expectation." Lily smiled slightly. "I'm learning how to speak up, Mom." Mary looked at her daughter with a mix of pride and worry. "You don't have to yell. You just have to say the right thing at the right time." "I will." Meanwhile, Mark was on the balcony with John. "Your mother called yesterday, huh?" John asked. Mark looked startled. "How did you know?" John chuckled. "It's written all over your face." Mark smiled tiredly. "Yeah, she's stressed about money." John nodded. "Folks who scraped by their whole lives get like that. It's not that they're selfish. They're just terrified of going broke." "I know, John, but it puts me in a tough spot." "Tough? How?" "Because I don't know how to balance it." John looked right at him. "You don't have to balance it all by yourself." Mark blinked. "What do you mean?" "Just be straight up. Be clear with your wife. Be clear with your mother. Don't let one misunderstand the other because you're too scared to deliver the bad news." That hit home. Mark nodded slowly. "I hear you, John." During lunch, Mark's phone rang again. He looked at the caller ID, stood up, and went to the hallway. Lily kept eating, but her ears were tuned in. A minute later, Mark walked back in. He couldn't hide the stress on his face. "Your mom again?" Lily asked. "Yeah." He sat down heavily. "She says she wants to come visit. Next week." The whole table went quiet. Lily didn't say anything. She just stared at her husband. She says she wants to see how we're living. Lily gave a faint, humorless smile. Mark wasn't smiling either. What do you think? He asked her. Lily put her fork down. I think we need to get ready. Ready for what? Ready to have a very clear conversation. Mark fell silent. I'm not going back to how things were, Lily said. Her tone wasn't hostile, but it was an iron wall. Mark looked at her and nodded. Okay, I'll handle the talking this time. Lily didn't press him further. She picked her fork back up and kept eating. But inside, a new feeling was brewing. Not anxiety, but readiness. For Mark, the reality set in that he could no longer dodge the bullets. If he didn't set boundaries now, it wouldn't just be a receipt on the table next time. It would be a chasm between him and his wife, and he finally knew he didn't want that to happen. The news of the impending mother-in-law visit changed the air in the apartment. It wasn't overt panic, but an invisible layer of tension coated everything. Lily kept cooking, cleaning, and chatting with her parents as usual. Mark was much more attentive, proactively asking if anything needed to be done. Yet, both knew a storm was coming. That afternoon, while John and Mary took a nap, Lily sat at the dining table with her ledger. She wasn't writing, she was just reviewing the past pages, studying the data. Mark walked out of the bedroom. Checking the books again? Yeah. Something not adding up? No, the math is fine. I just want to have my facts straight. Mark pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Straight for what? Lily looked up, her eyes calm. So that when your mother gets here, I'm not caught flat-footed. That gave Mark pause. You think she's going to grill you? Lily gave a wry smile. She doesn't have to ask direct questions. You can tell everything by the way she talks. Mark stayed quiet. You know, Lily said, I'm not scared of a tough mother-in-law. Then what are you scared of? She locked eyes with him. I'm scared of you not having my back. Mark was stunned. He had never realized that he was the actual source of her anxiety, not his mother. He started, but Lily cut him off gently. I'm not saying this to attack you. I'm telling you so you understand. She closed the notebook. I'm not going to sit quietly in the corner this time. Mark looked at his wife. His expression hardened with resolve. I understand. That's all I need. That night, after Lily's parents went to bed, Mark and Lily sat on the couch. Neither spoke first, but they knew it was time to strategize. Mark broke the silence. Lily, I think we need to get on exactly the same page. About what? About the money and how we run our lives. Lily nodded. I agree. I don't want your mother jumping to conclusions. What do you want me to tell her? Mark took a deep breath. I'm going to tell her that we manage the finances together. Not because you're spending wildly, but because it's a partnership. And I'm going to tell her that just because you're at home doesn't mean you're a freeloader. Hearing those exact words come out of Mark's mouth made Lily look at him longer. Not out of shock, but because she felt the sincerity behind them. Do you think she'll listen? I don't know for sure, Mark admitted, but I have to say it regardless. Good, as long as you say it. They sat in silence for a moment before Lily added, I'm not going to fight with her, Mark. You aren't? No, I don't like arguing with elders. So what are you going to do? I'll speak up when the moment is right, and I'll stick to the facts. Mark nodded. I trust you. Lily didn't say anything else, but she already had her game plan. 2 days later, John and Mary packed their bags to head back to Iowa. Lily woke up extra early to make a big breakfast before their bus left. Mary watched her daughter moving around the kitchen. You have to handle everything on your own up here. You must be exhausted, sweetie. I'm used to it, Mom. John, standing nearby, looked at Mark. Remember what we talked about, son? Yes, sir, I remember. You don't always have to win. What matters is taking care of each other. I know, John. Lily, listening from the stove, felt a warmth spread through her chest. Her dad was a man of few words, but they always carried weight. At the Greyhound station, Lily hugged her mother tight. Have a safe trip, Mom. You too, baby. Mary pulled back and whispered. If something happens, you speak up. Don't swallow it. I will, Mom. The bus pulled away, and Lily watched it until it merged into the Chicago traffic. Mark stood beside her in silence. After a while, he asked, You okay? I'm fine. She turned to him. Now it's our turn to get ready. Mark knew exactly what she meant. Yeah. That afternoon, Lily deep cleaned the apartment, not because she was afraid of her mother-in-law's judgment, but to make the space feel like her domain. Mark helped. He wiped down the tables and ran the vacuum chores he rarely touched before. Lily watched him. Doesn't it feel weird? What? Doing housework. Mark chuckled. A little, yeah, but I'm getting the hang of it. If you actually make a habit of it, I'd be thrilled. I'm trying. That simple effort made Lily's heart feel lighter. That evening, while they were watching TV, Mark's phone rang. It's my mom. Lily muted the TV. Hey, Mom, Mark answered. Yeah, next week. I know. You don't need to bring anything. Right. He paused, listening. Okay, Mom. Come whenever. We'll be here. He hung up. What did she say? Lily asked. She's coming earlier than planned, this weekend. Lily nodded. Better to just get it over with. You aren't nervous? Lily smiled a fraction. A little. You seem pretty calm. She looked right at him. Because I know I'm not doing this alone this time. Mark was speechless. He slowly nodded. You're not. That night, Lily lay awake for a long time. She wasn't afraid of the confrontation, but she knew the next few days would dictate the rest of their marriage. She didn't want to defeat anyone. She just wanted to be respected. Meanwhile, Mark felt something entirely new. He was no longer the dictator of the house, but the bridge between his old life and his new one. And he knew that if he dropped the ball this time, the distance between him and Lily would become uncrossable. Outside, the Chicago wind howled. Inside, they lay side by side in the dark. They both knew the coming days wouldn't be easy, which was exactly why they needed to be a united front. The morning sun was barely up, but the energy in the apartment had already shifted. Nobody had to say it out loud. Today was the day Susan, Mark's mother, arrived. Lily got up at her usual time. She wasn't rushing. She put on a pot of coffee, wiped down the counters, and prepped breakfast. However, her movements were highly deliberate, like a runner pacing herself for a marathon. Mark got up shortly after. He walked out, saw his wife at the stove, and paused. You're up early. Force of habit. Mark walked over. Let me help. Lily didn't decline. She handed him a bunch of green beans. Snap the ends off these. Mark sat down at the island and started snapping the beans. He wasn't as clumsy as he was a few days ago, though still no pro. Lily watched him for a second and whispered, Mark. Yeah? Remember what we talked about? I remember. You don't have to say much. Just wait for the right moment. They shared a look of mutual understanding. Around 9 a.m., Mark's phone buzzed. My mom's at the station. I'm going to grab her. Okay. Lily stayed behind. Not to avoid her, but to give Mark a few minutes alone with his mother to set the tone. 20 minutes later, the front door unlocked. Lily walked out of the kitchen. Mark walked in carrying a small suitcase. Behind him was Susan, a woman in her late 50s, petite but sharp-featured, with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She walked in, scanned the apartment, and said, Place looks decent. Lily stepped forward. Good morning, Susan. Welcome. Susan gave a curt nod. Morning. Her tone wasn't freezing, but it wasn't exactly warm either. Have a seat, Mom. Take a load off. Traffic from O'Hare was a nightmare, Mark said. Lily immediately poured a glass of ice water and brought it over. Here, have some water. Susan took the glass, took a sip, and then looked Lily up and down. It wasn't malicious, but it was undoubtedly an appraisal. Still just staying at the house? The question was casual, but the implication was loud and clear. Lily didn't dodge it. Yes, Susan. I'm managing the house. No plans to get a real job again? Lily offered a polite smile. We're discussing our options, Susan. Susan nodded and turned her interrogating gaze to Mark. And you? Work is good? It's fine, Mom. You need to hustle. Keep the money coming in so you don't end up on the street. I know, Mom. The tension in the living room was palpable. Lily took charge. You must be hungry from the flight. I'll get lunch started. Susan waved a hand. Don't break your back. Just make whatever you guys normally eat. Don't spend money on me. The phrasing was eerily similar to Mark's words from last week. Lily didn't react. She just nodded. All right. In the kitchen, Lily started cooking. Mark hovered in the doorway. You good? I'm fine. She smiled slightly. Go keep your mother company. Mark didn't leave immediately. If she steps out of line, let me know. I know. In the living room, Susan unzipped her bag and pulled out some Tupperware. Brought you some things. Just some casseroles and stuff from home. Nothing fancy. You didn't have to do that, Mom. Wasn't a hassle. Just brought what I had. A moment passed. Where's Lily? Cooking. Susan was quiet for a second. Mark. Yeah, Mom. The transfer you sent me. It was definitely short this month, wasn't it? Mark braced himself. Here it was. Yes, Mom. We had a lot of bills hit at once this month. Susan frowned. What bills? Mark took a breath. Cost of living went up. We're restructuring our budget. Restructuring? What does that mean? Mark looked his mother in the eye. We are mapping out our expenses. Lily and I sat down and did it together. Susan looked confused. You mean you weren't doing it before? Before? I was the one handling it poorly, Mom. Susan's eyes narrowed. And now, who holds the purse strings? We hold them together. Together? How? Mark didn't flinch. I deposit the money into the joint account, and Lily manages the day-to-day. But any big expense, we decide on as a team. Clear, direct, no stuttering. Susan sat in silence for a few seconds. Are you comfortable with that? Yes, Mom, I am. Mark's voice was steadier than it had ever been. In the kitchen, Lily could hear the muffled voices. She wasn't pressing her ear to the door, but she heard Mark sticking to the script. She kept stirring the pot, her chest feeling remarkably light. Lunch was served. It wasn't a feast, but it was a solid, comforting meal. Baked chicken breast, mashed potatoes, the green beans Mark had snapped, and a simple salad. Lily set the plates down. Dig in. Susan inspected the plate. Looks all right. Not a compliment, not an insult. They sat down. Mark didn't touch his phone. He passed the potatoes to his mom. Try these, Mom. Lily makes them great. Susan took a bite and chewed slowly. It's good. Lily just kept eating. A moment later, Susan put her fork down and looked at Lily. Well, you can cook, but sitting around the house all day isn't a long-term plan. The air in the room went cold. Mark looked at his mother. Mom? What? We already talked about this. Susan frowned. Talked about what? Lily being at home doesn't mean she's doing nothing. She runs this apartment and manages the budget. She works hard. Susan's eyes turned into slits. Are you getting defensive over your wife? I'm just stating the facts, Mom. The rebuttal left Susan stunned. Lily sat quietly, but her posture had changed. She wasn't the girl who just swallowed insults anymore. The meal continued, the dynamic forever altered. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't a surrender, either. After lunch, Lily started clearing the plates. Mark stood up to help her. Susan sat at the table, watching them in silence. After a minute, she got up and walked into the kitchen. Do you need help? She asked Lily. I've got it, Susan. Thank you. Susan didn't take no for an answer. Let me load the dishwasher. Really, it's fine. Susan stood there, arms crossed. Mark said you have a ledger. A budget book. Lily paused. I do. Can I see it? Lily looked at Mark. He gave a slow nod. Lily wiped her hands, walked over to the drawer, pulled out her spiral notebook, and handed it to her mother-in-law. Susan took it, opened it, and started reading. She read page by page. The kitchen was completely silent, save for the sound of the running faucet. And in that silence, a massive shift was taking place. But which way it would tip, nobody knew yet. The sound of the water hitting the sink was the only noise in the kitchen, but the silence felt incredibly loud. Susan stood right behind Lily, holding the notebook. She wasn't skimming. She was scrutinizing every single entry, tracing the lines of ink with her eyes. The sharp, critical look she'd worn upon arriving had morphed into one of intense, calculating focus. Lily kept washing the dishes. She didn't turn around or offer a running commentary. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew the math would speak louder than any argument she could make. Mark stood next to Lily, drying the pots. His hands kept moving, but his eyes darted toward his mother. After what felt like an eternity, Susan closed the notebook. Lily. Yes, Susan. Lily turned the faucet off, dried her hands on a towel, and turned around. How long have you been keeping track of this? A long time. How long? Lily thought for a second. Since I left my job. Susan nodded and asked, Do you log it every day? Just about. Susan looked at the cover of the notebook. The math is flawless. I didn't see a single error. I double-check it so we know exactly where we stand, Lily replied smoothly. The room fell quiet again. Mark wisely kept his mouth shut. So, Susan started again, does the budget always balance perfectly at the end of the month? No, Lily answered with total honesty. Some months are good, some are tight. And when it's tight, what do? I pull from the grocery budget or the emergency fund, and we cut back on whatever we can. Susan stared directly at her. Have you guys ever come up completely short? Lily offered a sad, faint smile. Yes. That answer visibly surprised Susan. If you were short, how did you eat? I made the portions smaller, Lily said softly. We ate a lot of rice and beans. We pushed off buying things we needed. At those words, Mark's hand, which had been aggressively drying a pan, stopped dead. He hadn't known the extent of it. Susan didn't speak right away. She looked down at the book, then back up at Lily. Why didn't you tell him? Because every time I tried, I was told we just needed to save more, Lily said, her voice entirely devoid of malice. It was just the truth. The truth hit the kitchen like a ton of bricks. Mark stood there, realizing how much of his own life he had been entirely blind to. Susan placed the notebook gently on the kitchen island and walked back out to the living room. Lily turned back to the sink. Mark stood beside her, paralyzed. Lily, Mark whispered, why didn't you make me listen? Lily didn't turn her head. I tried, Mark, but you thought I was just complaining. Mark had no defense. I don't blame you entirely, she added. At the time, I didn't know how to explain it in a way that you'd actually hear. Mark exhaled heavily, the guilt settling deep in his gut. He remained quiet. Out in the living room, Susan sat on the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. She was staring blankly at the TV screen, which was off. Mark, she called out. Yeah, Mom. Mark walked out and sat in the armchair across from her. I want a straight answer from you. Okay. Do you really let your wife handle all the household money? The majority of it, yes. How much of it? Mark gave her the exact figure he deposited into the joint account every paycheck. Susan nodded slowly. And what do you keep? A little bit for gas and my own incidentals. The rest goes into the house. And she makes the calls on it? We make them together. Susan narrowed her eyes. You trust her that much? Yes, Mom. I do. Why? Why do you? Mark didn't hesitate. Because I actually see what she does now. Susan stayed quiet. I wasn't paying attention before, Mom, but I'm paying attention now. I see that she isn't blowing money on clothes or lattes. She's stretching every dollar so this family doesn't drown. Mark's voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a new, unshakable gravity. Susan looked at her son. Her face softened, losing its sharp edges. In the kitchen, Lily could hear them. She didn't walk out, but she felt the weight lifting off her shoulders. A moment later, Susan called out, Lily! Lily walked out and stood near the sofa. Have a seat, Susan said. Lily sat down next to Mark. The three of them formed a small triangle. Nobody spoke. Finally, Susan broke the ice. You've been keeping that ledger for a long time. Yes. So why did Mark tell me about some stunt with a $20 bill and an envelope on the table when your folks visited? Mark flinched. Lily didn't back down. Because that day, I needed Mark to see the math in real life. See what? Lily looked her mother-in-law in the eye. See exactly what a $20 bill buys at the grocery store. Susan didn't say anything. She stared at Lily for a long time. You did that right in front of your parents? Weren't you worried about what they would think? I wasn't. Then what were you thinking? I was thinking that if we didn't get it out in the open, the resentment was going to destroy my marriage. That raw honesty stopped Susan in her tracks. She leaned back against the cushions. You aren't a weak woman, are you? Lily blinked. Excuse me? You hate fighting, but you don't just roll over either. Lily didn't know what to say to that. I used to think you stayed home because you were lazy, Susan admitted bluntly. Lily held her tongue, but I see now that even at home you're working the whole time. Lily nodded slowly. I am. The tension in the room snapped, replaced by a strange, fragile peace. Mark looked at his mom, then at his wife. He didn't need to play referee anymore. He just needed to be a partner. Susan stood up and pointed toward the kitchen. Keep the book up to date. I will, Lily said. And from now on, if something's wrong, you speak up. Susan looked pointedly at both of them. Don't make people guess. Lily understood that directive was for both her and Mark. I won't. That afternoon felt different. It wasn't completely carefree, but the thick fog of misunderstanding had burned off. They had laid their cards on the table, and for the first time, nobody was hiding. The rest of the day unfolded in a much more relaxed cadence. Susan wasn't firing off questions anymore. She sat at the kitchen island, occasionally watching Lily prep dinner. Lily didn't put on a show. She didn't try to whip up a gourmet meal to prove her worth, nor did she act overly deferential. She just chopped, seasoned, and stirred with her usual practiced efficiency. Mark sat near his mother, but his eyes tracked Lily. He was learning to appreciate the invisible labor that kept his life running smoothly. You've been making this recipe for a while, Susan noted, watching Lily season a pork tenderloin. A few years, yeah. Did you cook much when you were working at the agency? Not really. Maybe on weekends. So you really took all this on when you stayed home. I had to learn quickly. Susan walked over, picked up a tasting spoon, and dipped it into the gravy simmering on the back burner. Lily tensed slightly, but didn't say anything. Susan tasted it, smacked her lips once, and nodded. Spot on. 2 words, but they made Lily's chest swell. Dinner was completely different. Mark, without prompting, served his mom, then served his wife. Lily gave him a small, approving nod. Susan watched the exchange. So, Susan asked, if you decide to go back to work eventually, who is going to manage the house? We'll split the chores, Lily said immediately. Split them how? Lily looked at Mark. Mark will pick up half. Mark nodded. I'll do my share, Mom. Susan raised an eyebrow. Do you even know how to run a washing machine? Mark smirked. I'm in training. Susan let out a genuine, raspy laugh. It was the first time she had laughed since walking through the door. Good to hear. After dinner, Lily started clearing the table, and Mark was right behind her, scraping plates into the trash and loading the dishwasher. No assignments needed. They just worked together. Susan watched from the dining room. Mark, she called out. Mark dried his hands and walked over. Yeah? I always thought you had everything under control. I didn't, Mom. Clearly. I missed a lot of things, too. We're fixing it. Make sure you do. Don't make that girl beg for your attention. I won't, Mom. Lily heard it all. She didn't parade out to gloat. She just smiled to herself. A few minutes later, Susan walked into the kitchen. Lily, let me finish wiping down the counters. I've got it, Susan. Go relax. I know you've got it, but let me do it. Lily stepped back. Okay, thank you. They stood near each other. Susan sprayed the cleaner and wiped. You aren't a fighter, are you? I don't like conflict. But you aren't a quitter either. Lily stayed quiet. That's a good thing, Susan said, scrubbing a spot on the granite. A person who knows when to pick their battles is going to have a marriage that actually lasts. Lily realized her mother-in-law had finally moved from judging her to respecting her. That night in bed, Mark turned to Lily. Today felt different. It did. Your mom wasn't like she was this morning. What did you do to her? Mark joked. I didn't do anything. Then why did she change? Lily thought about it. Maybe because I didn't back down this time. You didn't yell, but you stood your ground. Yeah, Mark nodded. I'm learning a lot from you. You're a fast learner, because if you weren't, I was out the door. Mark stopped smiling. Seriously? Seriously, but I wanted to give us a chance to understand each other first. I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you woke up. They fell asleep that night faster and deeper than they had in weeks. The war was over. The next morning started lightly, but Lily felt that today was the day everything would be solidified. After a quick breakfast, Susan announced, I want to go to the grocery store with you today. Lily agreed. They walked the few blocks to the neighborhood market. Susan asked the prices of the produce, evaluating the quality of the apples and onions. Do you always do the shopping alone? Susan asked. Usually. Doesn't it wear you out? It does, but it's part of the routine. Susan nodded. On the walk back, she said, about that envelope thing. Lily looked at her. I thought it was a petty stunt when Mark told me about it on the phone. Lily wasn't surprised. I know. But now, I think it was the only way to get his attention. It wasn't an accusation. It was an acknowledgement. Yes, Lily said. Back at the apartment, Mark was waiting. How was the store? Busy, Susan said, taking off her coat. She looked at Lily. Let's cook. The three of them ended up in the kitchen. Lily chopped vegetables, Mark prepped the chicken breasts, and Susan peeled potatoes. It was an incredibly mundane scene, but it was exactly what had been missing for years. Mark, if you don't cut that fat off the chicken, it's going to be rubbery, Susan critiqued. Mark fumbled with the knife. I'm trying, Mom. Lily stepped in, putting her hand over his to guide the blade. Like this, smooth cuts. Susan watched them, a small smile playing on her lips. So you're finally taking direction, huh? If I don't, my wife will fire me, Mark joked. I don't fire people, I just reassign them to garbage duty, Lily shot back. The kitchen erupted in genuine laughter. Lunch was baked lemon herb chicken, mashed potatoes, and roasted carrots. Mark had helped season the chicken, and though he had been a little heavy-handed with the pepper, everyone ate it. Susan took a bite. Not bad. Really? Mark asked. For a rookie, sure. Lily smiled at him. You're getting better. After lunch, while they drank coffee, Susan set her mug down. I want to say something. Mark and Lily looked at her, about the money and how you two run this place. She looked at Lily. I used to think you stayed home because you wanted a free ride. And I thought the man of the house needed to control the bank accounts. Mark frowned, but let her speak. But after seeing it with my own eyes, I was wrong. You aren't lazy, Lily. Thank you, Susan. And you aren't reckless with $1. Susan turned to Mark. And you cared about your family's future, but you were caring about it the wrong way. Mark nodded. I know. Saving money is smart, but if saving money makes the people you love feel worthless, then it's stupid. Mark looked down. Lily felt a lump in her throat. Someone was finally saying it out loud. I'm not saying this to beat anyone up, Susan continued. I'm saying it so you both remember it. A marriage isn't just paying the light bill and buying groceries. It's making sure the other person feels valued. Mark looked up at his mom. I'm sorry. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to your wife. Mark turned to Lily. I am sorry. To both of you. Lily's eyes were soft, no longer guarded. Owning up to it is the first step, Susan said. She looked at Lily. And you handled this right. You didn't scream, but you didn't become a doormat. You played it smart. Lily gave a respectful nod. The air in the room felt cleansed. The lingering doubts and judgments had evaporated. That afternoon, Susan started packing her suitcase. You're leaving already? Lily asked. Yeah, my flight's this evening. I've seen what I needed to see. Lily went to the kitchen and packed up some leftover chicken and some snacks in a Ziploc bag for the plane. Here, for the airport. Thanks, Lily. Mark stood by the door with the suitcase. How do you feel? He asked Lily quietly. About your mom? Or about us? Both? I feel good, really. I had your back this time. I know. Keep it up. Before she walked out the door, Susan looked at the two of them. If you hit a bump in the road, talk about it, out loud. We will, Lily said. Don't let it get to the point where there's an envelope on the dinner table again. They all laughed. Mark, Susan said. Listen to your wife. I am, Mom. Mark and Lily watched the Uber pull away from the curb. They stood on the sidewalk in the cool Chicago air. Lily? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. Lily smiled. I came close. I know. But I figured if I walked away too soon, we'd never actually figure each other out. Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulder. I'm really glad you didn't. I'm really glad you decided to wake up. They looked at each other. They didn't need a grand romantic speech because they both knew the truth. A marriage isn't about who is right. It's about choosing to stay, choosing to learn, and choosing to act like a team. Life returned to its normal rhythm in the apartment, but anyone paying attention would notice the profound shifts. Mark woke up early the next morning, not because his alarm went off, but because he just woke up. He walked into the kitchen and saw Lily prepping breakfast. Let me help. I'll get the coffee. Sure, Lily said, not even turning around. He prepped the machine without needing instructions. They stood side by side in comfortable, easy silence. I'm heading to the office a little early today, Mark said over breakfast. Okay. What do you want for dinner? Whatever you want to make. Actually, I'll leave work on time tonight and we can cook together. A week ago, that would have been an empty promise. Today, Lily knew he meant it. The household ledger still sat on the desk. But now, it wasn't just Lily's handwriting. Mark's messy scrawl was in there too. Sometimes his math was a little off, or he wrote outside the lines, but he was doing it. "Do you think we can lower the internet bill?" he asked one night, looking at the spreadsheet. "It's a fixed rate," Lily explained. "If we want more wiggle room, we have to cut back on the streaming subscriptions." They were actually talking about money like partners. One evening, Mark came home exactly at 5:30. He dropped his laptop bag. "You look tired today." "Just the usual," Lily said, wiping down the coffee table. Mark looked around. "I see it differently now." "See what differently?" "Everything you do. I just never looked before." Lily smiled. "Well, you're looking now. That's what matters." He rolled up his sleeves. "I'm making the chili tonight. Are you sure?" "No, but you're going to supervise." Dinner was just a simple pot of chili, but as they ate, Mark set his spoon down. "Lily, I just want to say it one more time. I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you were less than." "I know, Mark. I thought hoarding cash was the only way to protect us. But you can't put a price tag on respect." Lily's eyes met his, clear and loving. "I never needed you to be flawless. I just needed a partner." "I'm getting there." A week later, Susan called. Mark put her on speaker. "Hey, Mom. We're doing good." "Put Lily on," Susan said. Lily leaned in. "Hi, Susan. Lily, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I was wrong about you, and I'm glad you didn't let me or my son walk all over you." "It's okay, Susan." "It's not, but I have peace of mind now. I know you've got a good head on your shoulders, and Mark is finally using his." Lily laughed softly. "We're figuring it out." When the call ended, Lily went to her desk and opened the ledger. She flipped back to the page with the $20 grocery breakdown. The actual receipt was still folded and tucked inside the margin. Mark walked up behind her. "You still keeping that?" "Yeah." "Why?" "As a reminder." "Of what?" "That if you don't talk about the little things, they turn into monsters." Mark nodded. "That $20 bill saved our marriage." "It was a very effective $20, Lily joked. They laughed together. Later that night, sitting on the balcony looking out over the city lights, Mark asked, "If you could go back to that morning, would you do anything differently?" Lily thought about it and shook her head. "No." "Why?" "Because if I hadn't pushed back, we'd still be miserable." "Fair enough. I learned something too." "What's that?" "That keeping your mouth shut doesn't buy peace." Lily smiled. "And I learned that managing the money is only half the job." They looked at each other. They didn't need to say anything else. Life would go on. There would still be hard days, tight budgets, and exhaustion. But the crippling weight of one person carrying it all while the other looked away was gone. They had learned how to live under the same roof, not just as roommates, but as a real team.